Pat McDonald, it is late August as we
It
record this.
is.
It is time to go back to school. I know my kids are starting up
Ooh.
this week, and we are starting off this episode of There's Nostalgia Like Nostalgia with Back to School from
Of
1986, the Rodney
course.
Dangerfield classic.
From what, 1985?
86.
86, okay.
Yeah. You got to get your history right, Pat. If we're going back to school, the dates are important.
I know, and I didn't write it down.
Let's
As I
hope.
did, now I'm talking about my whole academic life now. I just didn't write it down.
See me after class. No,
Exactly.
so here's, and we'll get into it because
Right.
I remember watching this movie. I'll just set it up real quick. Rodney Dangerfield plays Thornton Melon, who is a wealthy businessman. He runs a line of clothing stores called Tall and Fat. It's a kind of a national chain, a big brand, and he has an estranged relationship with his college-age son, played by Keith Gordon. And when Mellon's second marriage falls apart, he decides, you know what, I'm going to go reconnect with my son at college. He shows up to campus and eventually just decides, I'm going to go back to college because he never got the degree.
Right.
Um, he kind of buys his way into the school, and wacky misadventures ensue, and father and son kind of try to understand each other. And there's a whole bunch of great hijinks. This is the movie that introduced me to Kurt Vonnegut, for which I will always be grateful. Um, it's kind of a masterpiece of the 80s,
Of the
but
80s.
watching it in the 2000s is quite a different experience.
Well, there's a lot of problematic aspects to it. I mean, you couldn't make this film today.
Mm-mm.
Uh, I mean, the way it is, you have to adjust the Thornton character because, Rodney's routine back then was to be the horny man who liked to party, yet he was a middle-aged man.
Yeah.
So it works in some contexts, and in this one, there's a little questionable stuff going on, but it's all viewed through the lens of our newly created woke world. So there you go.
I want to ask you about that
Yeah.
because I don't mean to say that you're old, Pat, but
Well, I
you
am
were,
old.
but I mean, but you were an adult when you saw this movie in
Correct.
'86, right? And I'm not trying to incriminate anybody because I felt, when I watched it, because I was, 9 years old or whatever,
Right.
I was like, oh, cool. This is irreverent. This is very funny. I think a lot of the jokes are hilarious. There's a little bit of co-ed nudity and stuff, but
Sure.
I was 9, so I was like, oh, this is great. Both my parents actually took me to see this movie in the theater.
There you go.
It was like, family movie day. So
Besides the flash of boobs, though. Oops.
right,
Yeah.
well, it's the flash of boobs, but then it gets into the problematic aspect of it where he comes back and says you're perfect.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I mean, yeah. That's what I mean. Those things. Yeah. With
but
the
but
hot tub scene.
right, but
Yeah.
watching it, back then, what was your mindset? Was any of this
Well,
on your mind, or is this kind of a product of the, I guess, the new century enlightenment or whatever you want to call it?
yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a product of it. I mean, when you view it through the lens of the 80s, and it's impossible for me to like go back and know what my state of mind was. But I presume that I said, oh, it's just Rodney, and that's Rodney's character, and blah blah blah. But women don't come off very well in this film, quite frankly, overall. If
No.
you want to talk woke, it's very, very much they're used as objects and products for the male protagonist. So
With the slight exception of Sally Kellerman's character.
yes, yeah, I
Um,
agree. There is some depth there that's better.
and she plays Professor Turner, I believe, who's like the literature poetry professor, who
Right.
is, a lot of credit to this movie because it's not something that I feel the 80s really got right. Is, a lot of the objects of the affections, especially the older male, would be, the comely young co-eds, right?
Hmm.
Not to say Sally Kellerman was old when she made this movie, but she was, not in her, late teens or 20s. She was, a worldly, I don't know if she was British or she kind of had that like, yeah, Eastern, that like kind of
Probably the
Atlantic
Atlantic
accent.
accent. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Which I love. But she was a smart, kind of put together woman who was looking to find love. And there was a very revealing conversation with Thornton Mellon in a restaurant over this date where they're talking about gender politics of the age. And it's That struck me as something watching it the other night that, that conversation could be happening right now.
Exactly. And also too, gave me the impression that she had been through a really bad relationship and really wanted nothing to do with relationships in a sense, and so went with the safe Dr. Barbae, and and we don't, he's very fluid, so we don't know, if it's exactly, it's, he talks about it as if it's a merger. So, she's primed to meet a guy like Thornton Melon, who will take her, whisk her off into another realm. But I would say that Thornton is also a person that would be very difficult to live with if you
Pot-
look at his character.
Potentially, I
For a
mean,
woman.
well, and that's the kind of contradiction of this guy, because he raises his son Jason, who seems like a, kind of a well-adjusted kid, kind of
Right,
nerdy, wants to be this kind of athletic swimmer, like being on the diving team because his father was a swimmer. So I guess he kind of passed along that passion. But and you get this feeling from both Thornton and also Jason's stories, brief mentions as they are about Jason's mother who passed away. That was Thornton's first wife.
right.
Then Thornton admits to spending years kind of like running around chasing tail, as it were, until he settled on Vanessa, I think, played by Adrienne Barbeau, who, they
It's
split
one
up
of the
in the
great
beginning.
castings in the film. I'll talk about that in a second.
Oh yeah, just a great, setup. But
Yeah,
you just kind of wonder, was Thornton Mellon this irascible, horny midlife teen only after his first marriage kind of fell apart? Or to your point, do we have a picture of him being with the love of his life, the woman who helped raise this fine upstanding kid, and he was
right.
still acting like this?
Well, I happen to think that he is established in the story being a very wealthy man. He goes through a tragedy like his wife's passing. I don't know why we're talking about it in this context, but it is fun. And
Yeah.
he go it take his wife's passing, which was probably tragic because it seemed like you said the love of his life, and then suddenly he just goes into that second adolescent stage. But and why not? He's flush, he's going to be a man of the town, and it makes sense that he got into that marriage with Adrienne Barbeau. Great casting, by the way, even though she was kind of ill used, and then then is ready to meet up with Professor Turner,
Yeah.
if you will. Diane Turner is her name.
Oh, that's right, Diane.
Yeah,
Um, Yeah, it's weird because she doesn't get referred to a lot. I feel like mostly she's referred to as Professor Turner, but there are some moments like the hot tub where Thornton Mellon
right.
pops up with a snorkel on, says Diane. Um,
About
yeah,
marine biology, love it.
maybe it can
That's
help
what I
straighten out my
mean.
Longfellow. Yeah, I mean, like
Yes,
just
I know. It was my
there's just such.
Longfellow.
I mean, Harold Ramis, I think, was one of the producers on this movie, so
Yeah,
it feels very much in line with
yeah.
these kind of early '80s comedies,
Well,
which
Ramis came in as a script doctor on it because it
mm,
was just told. He's the one that suggested that they switch his character to a very rich man. So you take off that veneer of having to make a living or something. We just established he's rich, and that created the whole energy of the film after that. The situations he was in, but it's so typical of a Ramis film. It's slobs versus snobs. In this case, the slobs are wealthy, and the snobs are the intellectual elite. So there's some parallels going on to our current world, which we will also discuss.
oh yeah. Um, I and that's I'm trying to imagine the screenplay for Back to School before Thornton Mellon being a wealthy guy. Like, what is the movie
Yeah,
even
he's
about?
supposed to be poor, apparently. I don't know how that would work. So obviously they had this script and it just wasn't working. And Ramis steps in and says, here's what you got to do. You
I
know,
know
it's
the script must have been like 15 pages long, and they're like, well, now we can flesh it out
just
because
put the Animal House formula in. Now, here's a fun fact. It was filmed at the University of Wisconsin Madtown, Madison, which is a very famous campus. And the only school that Rodney Dangerfield ever applied to was the University of Wisconsin. That is truth.
really,
And the line that says, "I waited 40 years to get in this," is exactly in line with Rodney Dangerfield. He applied to the school 40 years earlier.
Wow. Because yeah, he had a storied career. Before he got into
Yes.
comedy, he was like a working stiff, and he
Uh,
didn't like start professional entertainment until what? Until he was in his
30,
50s. Is that right?
late 30s, late
Late
30s.
30s. Okay.
Yeah, that's when he broke in the 60s. But he was like a freaking vacuum cleaner salesman or something. It was crazy. Again, he's a proof that never give up if you want to do something.
Oh yeah,
But
and his whole thing, I get no respect. I mean, this
right.
had he done. Was this like his first big breakout vehicle? Because I know he had kind of
No,
popped up in some other films.
Caddyshack was
Oh,
his breakout.
Caddyshack, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And
But I mean, like as far
another
as
Harold
his
Ramis thing, so.
right, but I mean, as far as like a big starring vehicle, because Caddyshack was more of an ensemble, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I didn't see it. I don't know the order of his filmography. Did Easy Money come before? Because Easy Money, I believe, was his first
Okay.
breakout. And
And
I
I
think that
don't.
was 83. I'm not sure. I don't have the filmography in front of me, so
Okay, I don't know if I've actually seen Easy Money.
I haven't either.
Well,
But I
hey.
know the Billy Joel song "Easy Money" was in the early '80s, so '83.
Yeah.
But
Okay. Yeah. I just looked
I
it
got
up.
to tell you, they took a lot of biography from Dangerfield's own life. He started out as a truck driver. Thornton was a truck driver when he started out. But here's the most amazing thing: he was Rodney Dangerfield actually spent some time in the 1950s as an acrobatic diver in Atlantic City.
And yeah, Thornton Melon was an Atlantic City kind of
And
diving
I
star as
guess
well.
he insisted on having a swimming scene because apparently he was an excellent swimmer. That's how he kept in shape.
Well, what I love, about this movie that is kind of different than a lot of the other college comedies of the day is
Right,
there would be, some kind of like a sports event and it would all come down to the big game. This
right,
was
right.
more of the big game is an intellectual pursuit where he has to take this, multi-part, multi-hour exam, an oral exam in front of all his professors in order to prove that he didn't cheat, which of course we all know he did, and stay in school. But then afterwards, he goes to the swim meet to see Jason, perform. And it kind of ends up having that big, rah-rah sports moment. The thing is, the climax of the film doesn't hinge on the swim meet. It's sort of a secondary climax that is a fun
Right.
way to end the movie, but it's not, the world-ending stakes that happened during the oral exam.
Apparently, they use the same room as Flashdance for the same instructor. You remember the scene in Flashdance, which I thought
Wow.
was hilarious too. You have Rodney Dangerfield. They should have had the thing where water falls on him or something.
Well, he does ask for some water.
But
Um,
when you mention the triple Lindy in Act Two, you know it's coming up in Act Three, which
yeah.
it was truly spectacular too. I don't know who designed that stunt, but that was truly spectacular. The triple Lindy was going on three boards and bouncing precisely until you do the triple into the water.
Well, I
I
mean, that's the
hadn't
thing.
seen this in a long time, so I was like going nuts.
Yeah, it is impressive. I mean, I imagine there was some, some stunt people doing that
Oh
aside from the
yeah, it
close-ups
was.
of Rodney and everything. But it does look pretty thrilling. But as a first-time viewer, I knew the Triple Lindy would come back, into the
Right,
story. But
sure.
I thought that Thornton would teach it to Jason or something. I hadn't expected for him to be sort of brought in as this sort of relief swimmer at the very end.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah,
Well,
it's
I
so
think
good.
his toupee should have got a credit because that was spectacular. As a bald man, I'm always looking at toupees, and Rodney's was top grade.
Now I got to go back and look that. I didn't catch that as a toupee. It looked really good.
Yeah, yeah. He was bald and balding in real life. So yeah, he wore pieces his entire career.
Well,
And some people, he had a good toupee, man. That thing looked good. It looked natural to his features.
yeah. Now, speaking of careers, this was also an early appearance from Robert Downey Jr.
Amazing, huh? He
Yeah,
should have played. He should have played Keith Gordon's role because Gordon was just a kind of a wet fish, if you will. Whereas Downey took this small part as a best friend of the lead character and created like some real weirdness to it. You can see the star power in Robert Downey Jr. in this very small role.
Yeah, and I think it would have been interesting, but I think that Keith David was perfectly cast as the son because
Okay.
he had to be a contrast to his larger than life dad. You kind of get the feeling that
Oh yeah.
he's had to deal with this for 18 years or however old he's supposed to be. He's probably shrinking back into the shadow because like there's not enough oxygen in this room for two big personalities.
Well, I also think Downey would have played it as like the character he was. He would have been more punkish. He would have shown that contrast. But obviously, now I said this in my notes. When all is said and done, Robert Downey Jr.'s greatest historical film moment may have come when Rodney insulted him. You look like an advertisement for birth control.
Yes.
Oh, I get no respect. And I'm thinking Downey, in all of his great, career path, has that on his resume. I'm like, it's like being insulted by Rickles, and they have it on tape. So there you go.
I like when they first met. It's Dangerfield and Lou, his bodyguard, played
Right.
by the great Burt Young.
Yes.
They come in and they see these kids hanging out in the bed, and Dangerfield says, "Is that your real hair color?" And Downey says, "What do you think?" And he says, "I think you're trying to get back at your parents. That's what I think."
I have to mention, this is the first time in all of our discussions I looked up the casting agent. And there's only one name, Karen Standard. Hold on, we have an emergency vehicle coming by.
It's the podcast police.
Ambient noise on the summer day before school starts. Okay. Karen Standard's listed under the casting, oddly, as an assistant. There's no other, but the cast is impeccable. You got Downey Jr., you got Sally Kellerman, Burt Young, Paxton Whitehead, he was born to portray Dr. Barbae. Emmett Walsh, one of the great character actors of all time, playing the dive coach. Adrienne Barbeau, we mentioned. Ned freaking Beatty as Dean Martin. I love when Rodney cracked up after saying the name. And then, of course, the great Sam Kinison in his most Sam Kinison type role. Beautiful.
Yeah, playing
to
a
capture
professor.
that moment, to capture that zeitgeist, really, we owe a debt of gratitude to Mr. Dangerfield and the casting crew of Back to School.
Yeah, I mean, Kinison was perfect because even, I didn't know that much about him because I was very young, but I knew that
Right.
he was like an edgy comedian that my parents
Right.
liked. But he's one of those presences that his character is set up before he's introduced because Thornton and Jason are going, they're between classes, and Thornton says, "Oh, I got Professor Turgid's in American history." And Jason is like, well, good luck with that. He's like, "What?" He said, "Well, he's very committed. In fact, I think he was." And then it cuts to, okay, who is this guy? Just a close up of Sam Kinison's face, not being crazy, just looking, kind of professorial, looking over the class.
Yeah.
And I remember being in the theater and that just getting this
Huge
big
laugh.
reaction.
Yeah.
Because everybody knew who he was, and there was just anticipation of either he's going to just end the scene exploding on someone, or he's going to play against type, and it's going to be funny because he's not exploding.
Right. The famous scene where him and Rodney are talking about the Korean War. Apparently, there were so many goof ups that they got the one good take of the close up, but I guess if you watch it carefully, he's laughing in every other point. Rodney's laughing every other time he gets there. But let's mention William Zabka. The Mr. Karate Kid is fabulous as Chaz. And again, I was doing a lot of background stuff. He wanted to create a non-villain, a villainous non-villain. He didn't want Chaz to be the carbon copy of what's the name of the guy?
Johnny
in Karate Kid. And it was after that movie he realized he'd always be typecast as a villain, just because he did such a great job in Karate Kid. And then, ironically, years later, he reprises the role for a pretty big Netflix series. So who gets the last laugh? Johnny does.
And he is great because, I mean, he isn't the same kind of he's not even really a bully necessarily. I think he's
He's
kind
just
of
sort
too
of a
aloof for
counter.
that. Right.
He tells
Yeah.
some truth to the guy. He tells him, hey, you lived through your father, you're not going to be yourself. Well, that's what I want to do. Okay, I've given my advice. I'm going to go dive now. It was a weird kind of, well, you're a plebeian, blah blah. He was giving him all the upper or the rich guy thing, which I thought,
Hmm.
he was telling the truth. And the guy
Yeah.
decides, I want to be like that. Okay, we're moving on. I'm going to do my dive, and soon the
And
triple Lindy is coming.
the one like the one truly kind of scummy thing that he does is try and take his personal vendetta and sweep the rest of his team up in that by faking a cramp and
Right.
figuring, I'm going to throw this
Oh,
entire match, and
oh,
it
okay.
was just by sheer luck that Thornton Melon happened to be in the stands, and the coach
Coach
M.
was
Emmett
able to
Walsh.
bribe the.
Well, he didn't bribe him. He just said that he lied. He said that Mellon was on his alternate roster that he didn't have there. He said, "But I'll get that to you first thing, ASAP," which is sometime after the win the match. But my question is, what are the rules of this diving match? Because I don't know if you can have a former professional diver who's like in his 50s being on this college
not to
team.
mention, cheerleaders and full stands for a diving competition.
It's Wisconsin. What else are you gonna do? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I have to mention too that in the oral exam scene, Rodney Dangerfield gives a dramatic presentation of the Dying Light Robert Frost poem. It was Robert Frost, anyways. Uh, and I was thinking that's the only dramatic stuff he ever did in film, except for Natural Born Killers. Remember, he played that kind of slobby dad in that one.
And I wouldn't even call that dramatic. It's I get what you're saying, but yeah, this was his
Yeah,
first and almost only kind of serious portrayal.
and
But
he. Good.
no, good.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm sure the director said, let's play this as straight as possible because that's what will get the laughs. And it's true.
And that's the thing is, it was kind of goofy and funny, but I appreciated the sincerity because I felt like that character was eh, where he was in his life and in that exam.
Right,
I think that
right,
that was very necessary, and
right.
Professor Turner bringing that out of him helped rally him, because this is a line that I've been thinking about since I saw Back to School, and sometimes I'll even have occasion to bring it up in conversation, which is always fun. Professor Barbae comes up to Thornton Melon in the exam and says, "I have but one question for Mr. Melon in 27 parts."
Next time you're doing an interview, I have one question for you, but it's going to be 27 parts. Because Michael Glover Smith always makes fun of me because he said, you always have a two-part question. You do the setup and then you do the question. I'm like, well, how do I steer it otherwise?
Sometimes you got to do
So
preamble. It's fine.
um,
But
just having Kurt Vonnegut in the film was enough to give it another half star in any kind of rating system. Because
it's
and
it's
then Diane's line, whoever did write this didn't know the first thing about Kurt Vonnegut. Yes. And apparently Robert Ludlum, which he refers to when he has the argument on the phone with Kurt Vonnegut, it was his neighbor at the time, was Dangerfield's neighbor.
oh, really? But getting back to
Yeah,
briefly that exam, what struck me as kind of odd this time watching it was he recites, the Rage Against the Dying of the Light poem.
right,
And then she says, "And what does that mean to you?" And he says, "It means I'm not going to take shit from no one." I'm like,
right.
that's not really what that poem means. And she
Well,
gave
it
him the
can
one.
mean that. It can mean that. If I'm in a rage against the dying light, that means it's number one, baby. Look out for number one. And that was one of his philosophies. Remember the speech at the end.
Well,
Look
yeah,
out for
don't
number
step in
one.
number two. But
Yeah, don't
here's my
step at number two while you're looking out for number one. Exactly.
here's where I'm getting into the story part of Back to School. It's an exam, and okay, she says that he got all D's and one A, and that was from her,
That's a
right?
great line. Great line.
Yeah. But however, okay, so he gives a very surface level, and granted, we cut away after that answer because it's like the big rousing moment. I think we cut back to the diving match or something like that. But realistically, you've got a panel of professors and a dean sitting there watching this exam. he gives the most surface level analysis of this famous poem to a teacher that at least one of them knows has been dating him on campus. And somehow that's okay.
Yeah, there's not the ethics are thrown out the window. You know, it's
All over the
interesting.
place. Yeah.
I just not name dropping, but I just interviewed Rafe Spall because he
Oh,
was doing
nice.
that. He does that uh, uh, show for Apple TV Plus called
Hmm.
Trying. Anyway, he said something very interesting about women in the business because we were just talking. One of my questions had to do with his character being a post Me Too guy. And he was like, he said, one of the things about the business that people don't realize, besides the struggle it takes for women to break in, and they're always objectified. Men are not necessarily objectified. They have more of a talent uh, buy-in. But um, he said there's not a lot of roles for women. People don't tend to write roles for women that are as substantial as what we have in the canon for men. He said it's changing. Don't get me wrong, it's changing.
I was gonna say
They're
that's
creating
an
no, that,
assessment from
but he
like 5 years ago, though.
well, no, but he's talking about his entire career and breaking in, and because
Oh,
that was
sure.
that was part of the question. So and it was something that really hadn't occurred to me, but it does occur to me now because I see the progress of evolution. So
And
again, it's just watching something from the filter of now versus then. So
right. I mean, Terry Farrell, who plays Valerie Desmond, who's Jason's kind of love interest in the movie. She would go on to have a storied career in like Star Trek Deep Space Nine and all that. But watching this movie, you don't really get a sense of what
no,
kind of an actress she is. She is literally the object of his obsession,
right.
who after a literal handful of pretty brief and not very consequential scenes says, "I love you too." I'm like,
Uh,
really? When did that happen?
what motivated that? Got to move the story along. It's so funny because I saw I reviewed a DVD on in last week on one of my radio shows. It was Back to the Beach, another
Oh yeah.
'80s movie, 1987, and Lori Loughlin was in it, playing the Terry Farrell role. It was her name, Terry Farrell,
Yeah.
the love interest role.
Hmm.
Well, no, she wasn't a love interest. She was a daughter of Frankie and Annette. But I was like, it seems like this is generically the way that women were put into these films, these young actors, because it was so similar. And then, but Lori Loughlin to go on with the notorious college scandal, I was like, this is hilarious.
Hey,
This film is like a time capsule.
you're skipping over all of Full House, Pat.
Well, of course, but
Yes, I know.
what is her name? Aunt Matilda? I don't know that show. I know
I
it's a
haven't watched in a
pop
while.
culture phenomena, but Aunt Jessie, it was
No,
like
it's
they kept
Uncle Jesse. She
okay.
was with
She
Uncle
was
Jesse. Yeah.
Aunt Jessie. I don't know. Have you seen him lately? He looks like Aunt Jessie.
Wow. No. When they redo Full House, it will be Aunt Jessie. They're gonna bring back
There's the
Lori Loughlin to
twist.
play the John
There's the
Stamos role.
twist.
Yeah.
Now, did you see that odd ending credit called For Estelle? Thanks
Yeah,
for everything.
I did.
That was Dangerfield's agent, who apparently steered him in the direction that got him that fame at the end of his life. So, so she died during production. She was an executive producer on the film, as
Mm.
most agents are when they bring in the big star. So, yeah, it was very it was so it's the first thing they mention in all the background because it's an odd credit. It just pops up at the end after and again the iconic Rodney giving the thumbs up, with that expression. They couldn't get the right shot. Do you notice that one of the mortar boards that was falling to earth had kind of blocked him? But
Hmm.
it was the only great shot of that. So they had to freeze it with the mortar board, I think on his left or right shoulder, depending on, you know.
It is a weird kind of shot because it looks
It
like
is.
it looks like a freeze frame with mortarboard kind of animation happening in front of him. Like, what is he doing?
I know
Um,
it's really odd. The whole scene is odd. It almost seemed tacked on, like they
yeah.
brought it back everybody for the graduation scene, like months after they wrapped. But
Another person that this movie introduced me to, and I understand that I heard his music in things like Pee-wee's Big Adventure and other
Ah,
places,
yes,
but
yeah.
uh, oh my gosh, why am I blanking on his name?
Danny Elfman, the
Danny
great
Elfman.
Oingo Boingo frontman, yeah.
I was gonna say Tim Elfman, but I was thinking of Tim Burton. But no, Danny Elfman, yeah, because I didn't realize until watching this screening that Oingo Boingo did the music
Right.
for the film, or sorry, Danny Elfman did. Then
Yeah,
Oingo
well, he
Boingo shows
also
up to
did the
play the house
soundtrack
party.
beside he did the incidentals as well. So this is part of his career launch, it's a great moment in time for him, to express why do I keep giving that sign? I don't like giving that sign. Anyway,
Well, it's just one of those things. I was telling my wife that Back to School is one of the movies that ruined college for me. I mean, I went to like a commuter art school, so it wasn't exactly the same thing, but I thought it was going to be like Back to School, and I associated college with that theme music, that da, 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 it's very Elfman, and it wasn't until I watched it the other night when I was like, that's why it totally clicks with me. I love his
hilarious.
scores, and it's
It's
totally
great.
him.
The also Animal House came out my freshman year of college. So you want to talk about a film that changed college? It fundamentally changed well, suddenly, binge drinking and fun was the first priority. After, and I told you that story about Animal House where my brother and I went and saw Heaven Can Wait with Warren Beatty, and a guy came in afterward and said, if you'd like to stay for a preview of a new film, because it was the same studio, it's called Animal House, and we need to test it. So my brother and I stayed, who was 16. I was 18 or 17 or 18, and we were just blown away. It was
So
just
you
one of
were
the most amazing moments I've had in film history because here it was. And I got to college and everybody was talking about it, talking about it, talking about it. I said, I saw it 3 months ago. While they
the
were filming Breaking Away, of course, at the same time, by the way. Crazy history with it was almost destined that I would get into this biz. It's so strange.
well
So
that's
anyway, anything else
I do
you want to make a point about?
something I did notice this time, and it put a kind of a splinter in my brain because I couldn't tell if I was having deja vu or if it was an original thought. And it turned out it was deja vu. I watched this with my wife, and I thought, in a weird way, this movie is a prequel to the 2016 election.
Oh my God, I wrote down the same point, bro. I wrote down the same point. How about
Let,
that?
let me, if you will
Holy
indulge me,
shit.
I want to read to you the last paragraph of my written review from 2015, which I looked up right before we jumped on.
Okay.
The other internet sensation that Back to School reminded me of last week was presidential hopeful and walking 80s
Oh my
hangover Donald
God.
Trump, brash,
Oh my God.
opinionated, and concerned only with his own huge, fantastic, amazing orbit. It's hard to accept him as anything but a cartoon character, a very
Absolutely.
wealthy and entitled cartoon character. He's an aspirational figure for sure, appealing to the poor who want his opportunities and to the rich who want their opportunities protected from the poor at all costs. He's
Exactly.
Thornton Melon, minus the jokes and 0 hour self awareness.
Holy frickin' God. Here's what I wrote. Uh, where is it? Is Rodney a comic version of Donald Trump? Discuss.
Well, and here's the thing: before he took the national spotlight in politics, like
Right.
officially, because he'd kind of flirted with it over the decades.
Right.
This is the early to mid '80s. He was an icon. He was a pop cultural icon,
Well,
and
somewhat.
not
Yeah.
right. But it's not people, and even up into the early 2000s with The Apprentice. A very widely, it was a hit show that ran multiple seasons and everything.
Right.
People, it's hard to remember past the fog of the last 7 years, but there was a time when Donald Trump, if not beloved, was not loathed and kind of respected, at least as an entertainment figure.
Well, and by creating the character of Donald Trump, it was a benign character. He was a wealthy man who enjoyed his life and you're fired and all that stuff. It was not. there was no none of the things attached to it as you just read in that paragraph. I mean, now all those things are attached to it, and we can't separate anything from what he is now. And
Well, and that's
even that benign character was a fraud. I mean, that's how big a fraud he is.
well, and that's the. But I mean, like, if you watch Back to School, I don't mean to ruin this for anybody, or improve the
No,
experience. I don't know, but
no,
depending on
that
where
was
you
the
fall.
first
But
thing I thought about after I watched the movie. Go ahead.
well, because like after the kind of the flashback sequence where he's a kid played by Jason Hervey of the Wonder Years,
Of
and
course.
his father kind of encourages him to go to school and make something of himself. We cut to the modern day, and it's in, I guess, New York, and it pans up, and you see the Mellon Building, which is very kind of
Right.
Trump-esque. You've got the whole idea of kind of buying influence and just kind of throwing money around, like I'll just make these problems go away with cash. Uh, and as we mentioned, the scene where he gets to the campus and he wanders into the sorority because he gets lost, and he comes upon this lady in the shower. He opens the thing, she screams, and he says, "I didn't see a thing." And then he pops back in and says, "You're perfect." I mean, yes, it's something that we would not be able to even conceive of putting in a movie today, but it is also sort of on brand. We would not have not expected that of a quote unquote Trumpian figure from that era.
Well, and really, Rodney is sort of a version of a wealthy man in the 1980s. That he's diversified. He's in real estate, as we see in the short board meeting that he did, and
And
he's
toys, yeah.
smarter than everybody else. And that life lesson thing is the primary weapon he has at the college against the elites. And that again parallels the battle of 2016. It was the so-called intellectual elites represented by Clinton and the Democratic progressives versus the common guy, the guy who is, whatever he pretended to be, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, but the intellectual elites in this movie, my God, it's like a perfect time capsule. And oh, I have to mention Edie McClurg too, a great John Hughes character. She did the "You're Fucked," and she was, of course, in Ferris Bueller as One Righteous Dude line. She's great. I love her. Every
She is
time
great.
she appears, I smile. And she had a key role as the secretary. Her and Paxton Whitehead did a perfect scene there. I was like, put this in the time capsule. That's it.
Well, what I loved about, I'm glad you brought her up, because
Yeah.
that whole dynamic between Thornton versus Professor Barbae is one of the first, as I mentioned, and this kind of came across my 2015 review, that was the first time I'd watched Back to School in about 20 years. And I
Okay.
remembered it as being this kind of light, breezy comedy with not a lot to think about. And this is the first time when I started watching it as like Thornton Melon in a lot of ways is kind of a creep. Like
Yes.
you could very easily turn this around and make one of the college students sort of the anti Thornton Melon by saying, "You're just coming in here and buying everything, and it's not cute, it's not fun."
Well, I
Um,
mean, Karate Kid Johnny mentions it, to his son, and it's absolute truth that he tells him. And the
right.
son
And
pick. Go ahead.
well, I was going to say, and in parallel with that is Professor Barbae. During the scene, the first class of the business class that they're in, Barbae says, "We're going to spend this semester building a fictitious business from the ground up, everything from
Right.
construction to a management scheme and all of this other business." And he starts laying out this syllabus. And then Thornton Melon is like, "Well, you left out a bunch of stuff. You got to grease the Teamsters. There's
I
all
love
these,
that.
kickbacks and stuff." And
I
Barbae
love that.
says, maybe where you come from, that's how you do business, but it's not part of the legitimate business world, which makes me wonder, is that a commentary on either Mellon does things in a certain way that is not to be respected? He's gotten to the top, but through unscrupulous means, or is it meant to say that Barbae is so trapped in that college bubble of
Right.
like, this is how the textbooks say it is, this is
Right.
how it works in the real world, even though I have no clue like what a
My
Teamster is.
opinion is it's more of a real world context because that's everything he said makes perfect sense. you're going into a town. The politicians who give you the land or steer you toward the land has to be greased. The real estate company has to be greased. All of it has to be greased before you even put a brick down. And that's just life. That's just it's all. If you're in the business to make money, it takes money to make money, as the old saying goes.
Yeah. But it's one of those, and Barbae is also there talking to, the great Dean Martin, making a case against Thornton
And
Melon,
Ned Beatty
saying
playing the great Dean Martin.
right. Whatever it is that I have said here today, and then Melon's just, I don't know.
He was amazing. Just
but
that little small part.
But Barbae is constantly in his ear, pointing out this guy is buying his way into the university literally by
Right.
paying for a business school.
Right.
He's clearly cheating. We have to address this because it doesn't look good for the institution or the students. And he's getting pushback because he's very easily coded as the out of touch, snobbish
Intellectual
British
elite.
guy.
Right.
Right. When Melon nails it in a very, very Trumpian manner. His version of Little Marco is to say, listen, Sherlock. And immediately you can't see this guy as anything except,
Yeah.
Sherlock Holmes with a cap and I think he even has a pipe at one point.
Nice car. Can you do mine next? Or whatever, when he was cleaning his car.
Oh,
Yeah. Well, and that's all interesting because everything that Barbae is saying is the truth. But the world works in a different way than the truth and morality. As we're stuck in right now, we're stuck in a loop that says, oh yeah, it may be moral to do that, but here's how it really is. Here's how the world really is. And really, I mean, we're all getting an object lesson in this right now with the struggle of Trump and his followers. So it's all good and done to do little comedy sketches about it, like I did on Saturday, but put me in the real world and I'm lost. I wouldn't know how to grease a politician's palm, but that's the way it's got to be. That's why they act the way they do.
Let me ask you, did you say you wouldn't or you wouldn't know how?
I would not know how to do that.
Now, would you?
Because I've never been in a situation where I have to grease somebody's palm to build a building. And but the people who are quote unquote successful, the buildings that we sit in right now, obviously were built by somebody who knew to grease a politician's palm. So
right. And the one it is the one thing I would say, I know we have our agreements and disagreements on certain things political, but I would say that greasing palms and that level of corruption winds its way through all elements of politics and real life, but it is not exclusive to one party.
Well, I mean, again, I don't want to get into the binary of that because it is a binary thing. And I didn't mention a political party when I said that. I think it's more about businessmen.
Well, but I know, but you mentioned Trump and his supporters,
when you talk
right?
about politicians being greased, it's both parties.
Yeah.
But it really goes to the scruples of the politician. But the reason that they get elected sometimes is somebody cuts them a check, and when I build this building, I get no pushback, right? I get no pushback from the lefties. I get no pushback from the environmentalists. Here, take the check. Once you take it, you better do that. And they do, despite what party it is. And that happens more on a local level than a national level, but it's the same thing. Micro and macro, it's the same goddamn thing.
So, Pat, are you saying that are you saying the solution is that we all need to dip out of the real world and go back to school?
Exactly.
Because I'm about there with you, man.
And do a triple Lindy. And I got to go over some of these facts just quickly. We talked about the Kinison thing. Oh, Diane's house is the same one used for the Doyle house that Jamie Lee Curtis babysat at in Halloween. So besides the Flashdance reference, we have the Halloween reference. The house is the same exterior. And of course, due to Rodney Dangerfield's contractual obligations with the Miller Brewing Company, who famously did the light beer commercials, he had to have references for any beer. It had to be. Now they had the big advertisement when all the cops came to the party, which was a great gag, and then brought extra beer, and it was Miller High Life on top, light beer on the other. Second.
Well, that was another. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. It's just go ahead. Just because I'm moving to another fun fact, but go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that one of the other, when I'm watching this in that kind of different mindset of like, is Thornton Melon kind of sleazy? The cops bringing the beer to the house, that's one thing. But the party in the bar, I think it was the Oingo Boingo party, or
Hmm.
no, no, that was the one where they were singing "Shake It
Twist
On,"
and
they
shout.
twist and
Oh,
shout, right?
that's another fun fact.
Right. Well, uh, Robert Downey Jr.'s character, Derek, shows up. He had gone to a pep rally with some other kind of anarchist friends to kind of sabotage things and ended up like
Right.
dousing everyone in green paint. He goes back to the
Right.
bar to
Again.
get, shit faced. And then the football team ends up showing up and saying, we're going to beat the crap out of him. And Dangerfield gets his hired muscle, Lou, Burt Young, to step in and start a fight, like beating punching the
Straight
big,
out of a barroom
Cro-Magnon.
fight from the Wild West.
Right. But my point is, Derek, I'm not advocating violence, but I'm saying if anyone was going to get their ass beat, it was Derek and his friends because they had gone to this pep rally and they decided to mess with it. Like nobody asked them to do that.
Uh, um, the Dean Martin reference was an inside joke. Did you know that? Rodney had appeared on the Dean Martin show during the 1960s, so that was his tribute to him. Isn't that great?
It is.
And um, the line, if you want to look thin, get
You
next
hang
to
out with
fat
fat
people.
people.
Right. That was from the Jackie Gleason show. When Rodney appeared on that, I guess they did a sketch where he talked about that. And Bing Crosby made a movie in 1960 called High Times, which would be a whole different thing now, but it was the same plot. A rich industrialist goes back to college to be with his daughter. In this case, I think it was
Whoa.
Sandra Dee, and yeah. Except there was music, and he becomes involved with a female professor. So
I
everything old is new again.
that
Or in this case,
that sounds like one we could cover because that sounds great.
now interestingly enough, when you think about it, the film was made in '86, so it was made 26 years after High Times, and now '86 is nearly 40 years past. So we're
Oh,
farther away from the movie that Back to School is compared to. So, what is your favorite memory of going back to school?
you mean this movie?
No, in general.
Oh, well, I never really went back to school. I went
Well, I
to
mean,
school and
just
then I
when
got
you're a
out.
kid, or
Oh, I gotcha.
what,
Okay.
the feeling, the anecdotal feeling, if you will.
It's a friend of mine. He's having a birthday today. Greg, happy 45th birthday.
Very
Um,
good.
and we went to art school together,
Hmm.
the American Academy of Art, class of '97. And we're Facebook friends, and on Facebook, it was like, wish Greg a happy birthday. And it had a whole bunch of pictures that he had posted, over the years
Right.
from that class of people. And so I got to see us and all of our friends from then, all like
Amazing.
young and skinny and hopeful. But
Before
that's
the
the kind
world
of
beat us down.
exactly. There's another movie coming out that I'm going to be talking about later this week called Funny Pages. I don't know if you've watched it, but it's about a kid who
No.
drops out of high school to go pursue an art career. And it hit really close to home in a lot of points. And other points, I'm like, wow, that's some demented imagination. But no, the whole point is just kind of getting nostalgic for the feeling of going back to specifically art school. You're kind of an adult,
Hmm.
but you're not fully out in the real world. So it's like going back to a cooler version of high school and hanging out with your friends. It was just really neat.
Well, it's so funny because you, as a kid, when you're going through the system, you delineate the year based on going back to school. That's the feeling for me that when fall comes, there's the renewal because we renew our school year in the fall, and now and basically culture kind of stays with it too. They put out their new TV shows, they put out their new movies, their prestige movies for Oscars, et cetera, et cetera. But that's, to me, that's back to school, is the fall. And also, when you talk about going back to college, it was really difficult for me to leave my old life behind and go to a school where I barely, even though I was going in state, only six people I knew were going to that school, and they were far flung. So I had to
Wow.
start over, and that's what I remember about college days, because starting over and making a whole new crop of fellow travelers, which I still happen to see just like you. I would love you to send me a picture of your old days. Please send me one of those prime pictures. I'm sure you're clean shaven, right?
No, I had much
Oh,
shorter hair.
okay.
I think I don't think I had shaved, but I wasn't like crazy beard man or anything.
So
I'll send you something. Just don't put
let
it up anywhere.
I won't.
No.
And let me, if this is one of the final points, it's one of the fun facts that I just love. You know, Rodney did a version of Back to School, or Twist and Shout. And of course, Ferris Bueller did a version of Twist and Shout. He just mined the Beatles version. Now, those two films came out the same freaking week and caused Twist and Shout to go back up the charts to number 23. So the Beatles had only two hits in the 80s. One of them was the Beatles medley that they put together, that stupid movie medley. And then the second one was Twist and Shout. Again, goes to number 23.
I'm just blown away that Back to School and Ferris Bueller came out the same week. I
I
knew they were
know, it's
both
crazy,
86.
isn't it? Yeah, one of the points made was that Ferris Bueller's reputation over the years has grown as a kind of a marker for that generation. But whereas Back to School is considered a throwaway, but Back to School was the second best grossing comedy of that year after Crocodile Dundee, and the sixth overall. It probably made 300 million. Who knows how much of a piece that Rodney had? It just fueled his cocaine and marijuana habit for the rest of his life. God bless Rodney Dangerfield and Sam Kinison.
Yeah. Well, and bless you too, man. I'm glad we talked about this movie. It's I maybe another 20 years I'll watch this again. I'll feel differently, but it was definitely an
Yeah, it was
experience
really a
to
perfect choice.
yeah.
Really a perfect choice for the theme and a perfect choice for discussion. And as we had some really good discussion, especially the Trump stuff. I want
Yeah.
to show you a couple films that I'm interested, because I got them from, a service, and I thought one of them would be really good for our discussion. Hold on a second.
All right.
Now, these are two obscure films, one I've seen and one I've never seen, but
Okay.
they've been just released on Blu-ray, uh, uh, exaggerated Blu-ray discs where they took the print and everything. But one is Donna Floor and Her Two Husbands. Now, this is based on a very famous novel, and they did a. I'm trying to see who the novel was. Oh, Jorge Armado, a very famous South American writer, a very famous book. I love the book so much. I sought the movie out, and so I have seen this, but not since the 80s when it came out. And here, this is my favorite, and I think maybe this might be the one, but Battle for the Stars. Is that what? Battle of the Worlds, I'm sorry. And
So
this is like a 60s cult classic, which I've never seen. And it is with the great Claude. Claude Rains is in it, one of his late roles. The actor, of course, from the 40s who was in Casablanca, etc. So those are two choices I want to throw into the hopper. We don't have to make the decision now, and we don't have to do it next month if you had something else in mind, but down the line.
no, I think I like that Battle of the Worlds. It sounds
I
like
do too.
the studio, the Asylum, they do all those direct to video knockoffs of blockbusters.
Yes.
That Battle of the Worlds sounds like what they would have put out for War of the Worlds like a few years ago.
Right. Well, and again, it's coming off the 50s sci-fi craze, and it looks like a drive-in movie, but then became this more because it had a different script or something. So, yeah. So
I'm
you
all
want to
for
do
either of
Battle
them.
of
Yeah.
the Worlds?
Well,
All
I'm
right.
up for both of them. We'll talk about whatever that's going to be for next month
Yeah, no
or
worries.
beyond.
No
So,
worries. I know
all right.
the fall is going to be very busy for everybody. So
Oh
we're
yeah.
back to school.
And learning new things every day. So, Pat, again, thank you very much for
Always a
hanging out and
pleasure.
talking about this
Always a
classic.
pleasure.
And yeah, we'll catch you next month or next semester. Or I don't have a good school pun to close this out. So yeah, class dismissed.
School's out forever.
I'm not paying for that. Not paying for that.
Right. Sorry, Alice. All right, brother.